So this is the video for day 2 on due diligence. This section is about working out some calculations and using a spreadsheet to arrive at the numbers. Now this video is going to look different because I am not using the actual recording from the live webinar session. Instead, I'm doing a recorded session because I felt like I could have explained these concepts better than I did on the live training session itself. So I will proceed today to talk about the due diligence section of day 2, and we're doing some calculations. Okay, so first I'm going to share my screen so that we can look at the slides. So there are 4 calculations that I'm going to show you today. These calculations are used to carry out due diligence on properties that a property investor might be considering buying. You can also use these calculators to carry out some market research on areas that a property investor might delegate to you as a virtual assistant to calculate before he decides to choose an area to invest in. Okay, so I would normally use an Excel spreadsheet with the calculations already entered and formulated in the spreadsheets. However, before I do that, I am going to show you the individual calculations for each of these numbers. Okay, so we've got yield, ROI, which stands for return of investment. And then we've got money left in the deal, and we've got cash flow, or whether the rental income from the property can wash its face. That is a term that property investors use and landlords use to determine whether there's going to be positive cash flow at the end of the month after you consider all of the expenses that are coming out from the rent that's coming in. Okay, so first we deal with the yield. Okay, so how to calculate yield? We take the annual rent, we divide that by the done-up market value, we multiply that by 100, and we get the yield in percentage. Okay, so the yield is a quick calculation that can be done so that a landlord, a property investor, can compare when deciding between 2 properties. The one with a higher yield is generally, not always, there are other factors to be considered, but generally might be in a better position to be chosen by the property investor to be purchased over the other property with the lower yield. Okay, we'll do some live calculations shortly. I just want to run through all of the formulas first before we go into the individual calculations with live examples. So then we'll do the exercise later, calculating cash flow. So to calculate cash flow, we take the monthly rent less all the expenses that are coming out, including monthly mortgage amount, letting agency fees or management amount, and then other monthly expenses. Now, when a property investor is simply considering buying a property, he or she may not know exactly what the other monthly expenses are going to be. So to use this as a due diligence calculator, a landlord might simply say, can you put in 10% of the monthly rent will be equivalent to what I expect the monthly expenses are going to be. If it's an HMO, it's likely going to be higher than 10%. It might be somewhere around 15% instead. Other landlords might even push it up a little bit higher in order for them to cover instances where there are going to be voids in the property. So then we'll do some exercises later. Now we are going to look at how to calculate money left in the deal. Now, why would a property investor want to calculate money that's left in the deal? Well, an investor is sometimes going to need some cash to be left in the deal because that money cannot be recycled. It is the cost of buying this investment. Now, we will use the amount, the figure that we come up with, with the money left in the deal in order to calculate the return of investment, because a property investor will need to know whether the return of investment of the money that's left in the deal is sufficient enough and matches the strategy or the criteria that the property investor has determined and chosen for himself to be the figure, the amount that he wants as a return of the money that's left in the deal. Okay, so this is how you calculate money left in the deal. So we've got a formula where is A is minus B plus C, where A is the new mortgage loan amount. So this is after refinancing the property, okay? B is the initial outlay, which includes the deposit, the refurbishment costs, taxes, financing costs, as well as other costs involved for purchasing the property. And finally, we've got the original mortgage amount. Now, we assume this as well as the original mortgage amount as well as the new mortgage loan amount. We assume this usually to be at 75% of the either the done-up valuation or the purchase price. Okay, so the difference between the purchase price and the done-up valuation is that the purchase price is the price that you bought the property for originally, and then perhaps you refurbished it or you added value to the property so that now it can command a higher valuation for when you refinance it, you can get a larger mortgage loan amount. So what we're trying to see here is if the new mortgage loan amount can at least cover both the initial outlay and the original mortgage loan amount that we need to repay. In an ideal situation, you not only cover everything, but that there's surplus money involved, okay? But we know that sometimes that's not the case. And in this instance, we might get a negative amount after the sum. And that negative amount means that that money, that amount is left in the deal. That is money that the investor wasn't able to pull out after refinancing. And therefore, it's not a liquid it's not in liquid form. It's not cash that the investor can pull out and, for example, use as a deposit to buy another property. So the investor will want to know, is he or she getting a return for the money that's left in the deal, and what return are we looking at? So that leads us to the last calculation, which is how to calculate ROI, return of investment. So we've got the annual profit, and you divide that by the investment. Either you're looking at the money left in the deal after you've refinanced the property, or if it's not possible to refinance at the moment or not in the near future, then whatever money was used as a deposit to purchase the property, as well as other costs involved to purchase the property. So that would be the investment that you'd like to calculate what the return is. And if you multiply that by 100, you get an ROI in percentage. So we are going to do some calculations now. I am going to exit this. Okay, so what I was just showing you were the 4 calculations that you might need to carry out to help a landlord or property investor carry out some due diligence or market research on a property or a few properties. So what I'm going to show you next is a spreadsheet that I made and I use for myself when I do due diligence calculations. This is something that I created for myself. The property investor or landlord that you work for might have his own spreadsheet, but the calculations and the formulas remain the same. I like doing it this way because this is how I understand how numbers work. For example, I've got 2 equations here. One is the original purchase, that is to say, how much did the property investor buy the property for in as the original purchase, compared to another equation up here, which I call the remortgaging figures. Now, this only applies if the property investor is doing an exit where he's or she is refinancing the property in order to pull some money out. Okay, he or she can only do this after he or she has increased the value of the property, either by refurbishing the property or developing the property or waiting enough time for the property to increase in value. Okay. So down here are the 4 calculations that I showed you in the presentation. So we've got yield, we've got cash flow, we've got money left in the deal, and we've also got the ROI calculation. So what I'm going to be doing is using Rightmove and Zoopla to find real properties to use calculations on, okay? And we are going to do 3 kinds of rental properties. One would be a buy-to-let property, a single buy-to-let. The next property we'll do is an HMO calculation. And then the third one is to do a serviced accommodation calculation. We'll be using perhaps just the same property, and we'll be looking at how much difference in yield and ROI if we are doing any of the 3 rental income strategies. So we've got here, let's go back to the spreadsheet because I wanted to show you that I've got red colored cells, and these cells mean that this is where you enter figures. The other cells have been either pre-entered for you or have formulas in them, and if you change the formula that's on there, your figures might come out incorrectly. So please don't touch these cells. Only put in figures where it says enter figure. So we've got here, enter the done up valuation, enter the purchase price, enter the refurbishment costs, enter the rent. We're gonna have to use Rightmove or SpareRoom to find out the rental income that we're getting. And then finally enter the mortgage amount that we've got here. Okay, so I am going to prepare the screen and type in interest only mortgage calculation. Calculator. We'll do that in a second. All right, so let's go back to here. I am going to use Rightmove to find our property, and I'm going to use an area that for us to do our mock due diligence calculations on. So I'm going to choose, for example, we have here Leeds in West Yorkshire, and we'll click for sale so we can see what's for sale in Leeds. I know Leeds is it's a big area. There's several smaller regions within Leeds, but we're just going to use that as a general online research, okay? Property type, we'll just choose houses. We are going to use, because we want to be looking at properties that will need refurbishment. So we want something that's cheap. So I'm just going to say maximum 90,000. We'll see what we get. If we can't get anything, I might increase that to 100,000. Okay. Minimum bedrooms 2. Added to site anytime. Find properties. And we've got, as you know, we've got some more filters that we can type in order to narrow down the search results. We don't want new homes, buying schemes, or retirement homes. We're not too bothered if it has a garden or parking. Okay, so what we've got here are 29 search results. If I'm going to type in a keyword in need of, I am hoping that it will show me the results that are, it will show me results of properties that need refurbishment, okay? Okay, attention investors, right? So we've got their pretty pretty lovely property here that definitely is going to need some kind of modernization and updating. This one is also in need of a 2-bedroom. I am going to open some of these so that we can see which one will allow us the biggest discount. Now, I am reluctant to choose guide price listed properties because that means that's the minimum that they want the properties to sell for. Are these all guide price? Except for the first 2. So I might just be looking at the first 2 instead. This one says guide price, so let's not consider this. Now I am going to see which one has the biggest room for an increase in value. So this one is 80,000. Now, looking at the pictures, I would say as long as there's nothing structurally wrong with this property, it looks like in good enough condition. Even the loft area, there's a small wet patch up here, which might indicate there's something that needs to be fixed with the roof. So that might be an expensive job, or it might be something else. It might just need new flashing, which might not cost that much. So I generally like to take out my notepad so I can make notes. This one says Mafeking. I think that's called Mafeking. Mafeking Grove, Leeds LS11. Asking 80. The refurb looks like it might need, I don't know, I'm going to say it might need 20K refurb. Now, I am going to need to find out what the done-up valuation is. And later on, for rent, I need to know how much it will rent for as a single rent. I will need to know how much it will rent for as a single buy-to-let, as an HMO, and as an Airbnb service accommodation property. I'm now looking at the rest of the listing to gather more information about this property. So it is looking like Okay. It's already telling me what the achievable rent is expected to be for a single buy-to-let. So I am going to use that information and not spend time doing extra research later, unless I want to really double check what the figure is going to be. Okay. I want to be looking at this point, I want to be looking at the market information. Now, Rightmove, as I've explained, Rightmove has recently changed their layout, so I'm having difficulty finding where the market information is. Okay. This is not being helpful. There it is, market information. Right. So we've got here, we don't want to look under for sale because that might be a vanity figure. What we really want to see are properties that are sold. So what were the actual sale price that we can compare it with? Okay, so these are looking like they're in the same outcode postcode area, which is LS11, but they may not be exactly in the same neighborhood. So what I'd like to do next really is find out the full postcode of this property. And that house looks like that's number 3, and this could be either 1 or 5. So I am going to see if there are, if I go into Google Maps, I'm gonna check in number 3, Mafeking Grove. It's in Beeston, Leeds. It was Grove, wasn't it? Yes. Mafeking Grove. I mean, thankfully, it's a short street. That means that if we're gonna virtually walk through this, we will find the property in question and see what the number is. It's this one. Okay, Google thinks it's number 6. I am not too sure because this one did say number 3. This one said number 3 earlier, and that one now shows a bin or some, yes, it's a bin, that's number 5. So I just want to double check indeed if this is number 1. Unfortunately, I can't get any closer. Google thinks it's number 1. Number 6, all right. Number 8. There's a number 2. Okay, so it's looking like if this is number 2 on this side and it's even and this side is odd, that it might be correct that this is number 1. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is now go to Royal Mail postcode finder. And type in number 1, Mafeking Grove, Leeds. Now I have the full postcode to use to search for sold house prices. So this one says LS117BY. I'm going to copy that and check out house prices and type in the full postcode. Before I increase the radius of my search result, I'm just simply going to select this area only to see what information I'm going to get. Ideally, I'd only like to see sales within the last maybe 2, maximum 2 years, But if I can just do one, unfortunately, there's nothing coming up. Maybe last 2 years, still nothing's come up. So I'm going to say last 5 years, still none has come up. So tell you what, last one, but quarter mile around. I think that's a better indication. This was a terrace property and freehold property. Now we're looking at, okay, so these are sold house prices all in 2020, 72, 88, 99. The property at Mafeking was a 2-bed terrace. So like for like comparables, I would be looking at this one at 88,000. That one's a 4-bed, so I can't compare that as use that as a for comparison. 3-bed. This one is a 4-bed that's 72,000. Now it's possible this is quite a heavily distressed property. No, I am not so sure why this one sold for 72,000. Okay. Now I am going to consider this, but with a discount, appreciating that perhaps house prices might be on a downturn in the next 6 to 12 months. Donut value, I would say something around 80,000. Okay. I would say this property is not a good deal, just because if it's asking for 80,000 and it's only ever going to achieve 80,000, but the refurb price, I mean the refurb costs, if the refurb is going to cost you 20,000, you are spending 20,000 over what it's really worth. Okay, what it's going to end up valuing. So to me, unless I offer this property maximum 60,000, I don't feel like I'm even going to consider this property. So let's look at the second listing that we selected. And this is a property in Lambton Place, Leeds. There is no first postcode. So postcode is a question mark. We will need to find out. It's a 2-bed terrace. And then it's asking for 80. Let's just round that off to 80. We don't know how much the refurb is going to cost, and we don't know the done-up valuation. We are going to find out in a minute. We just want to see some more pictures to find out what the refurb is going to cost for this property. This property is a little bit more modern than the previous property that we were looking at. So I would say if it's just a course of redecoration, we could probably put this property for refurb cost would be about 5,000. It's a little bit on the low side, but I am guessing that the end valuation, the done-up valuation of this property in this area might not be too high. So it might have a ceiling price that it doesn't matter how much you spend on this property, its value is never going to achieve more than what the current market prices are. Okay, so I think I remember where market information is, so it's right here. Let's look at property sale history. No sale history, that's fine. Market information, sold. Is this the same property? I don't know. 75, 85. These are all Lambton Place, Lambton View. These are Lambton View properties. Lambton Place, 75. Is this the same property? Is that different? That's just Lambton Terrace. Okay, no, they're not the same property. Right. So LS8, I am gonna go back to the market information to see and to get the full postcode. Okay, so it's Lambton Place, we know that for sure. And we are simply going to use the postcode that's already there on the listing. So we don't need to go to Google or to use Royal Mail's postcode finder in order to get the full postcode. I just want to see the pictures in this property to make sure we're not looking at the same one. Okay, that might be the neighbor. Okay, so this is the property we're looking at. Okay, so sold house prices. I'm just pasting the postcode on there. All years, I'd say last 1 year. Again, we're looking at pretty low valuations here. So 70, 71, 95, but that's a 4-bed terrace. So not really the same value we're doing here. Done up valuations, I'd say 75,000 at most, maybe 80 at a stretch. So if it's already asking at 80, unless you can command a discount, so we can probably just for this exercise, imagine a scenario where the property investor was able to negotiate a discount from the purchase price. Okay, so we might consider that. What I'd like to do just for us for a last exercise is use this property that is mentioned as a guide price at 60, but for cash buyers only. Okay, and it says it needs refurbishment and once improved. Recent sales price suggests there could be plenty scope for profit if they say so. So we might consider this property. Market information, sold. Okay. That might be the case. So this might be the property we can use for exercise. But first, let's take down some details about this property. And this is in Acre Crescent, Leeds. We don't know the postcode just yet. Guide price, remember guide price is not the sold price. That's like the minimum. And we are going to maybe later on assume what the, we might put in a figure to assume what the sold price might be, okay? So we also need to know how much the refurbishment will cost and what the done-up valuation is going to be. So first, let's look at the pictures to see how much work does this property need. All right, so you've got here some funky old tiles in the ceiling, which we're going to need to remove. A course of replastering of the walls, changing the fire place, and most likely doing the plumbing and possibly even the electrics on this property, because if it's this old, then it may need rewiring. If the electrics are quite old, replacement of some of the meters and units in this property. The kitchen is going to need a total refurbishment. We've got an old style kind of boiler here using a water tank. We can replace that with a combi boiler. This is the bedroom. I don't see any damp patches, so that could be a good sign that apart from a course of modernization and redecoration, that this property is in good shape. Okay, floor is kind of wet. I'm hoping that there's no leak in this property. The ceilings don't look like there's any leaks from upstairs. Okay, I want to see the floor plan a bit. The bathroom is thankfully already upstairs. Some of the older properties in the UK have the bathrooms downstairs where the bedrooms are upstairs, and so that's a little bit inconvenient for, let's say, families moving in, and they would prefer to rent a property with bathrooms that are already upstairs. Okay, so it's nice kind of general layout, 3 beds upstairs, a bathroom upstairs, and then a lounge and a kitchen downstairs. Okay, cash buyers only. Now, if the investor has a good amount or a large pot of cash and he doesn't need to borrow cash to buy this property, then we don't need to consider the cost of finance. But more than likely, the investor is probably going to borrow the money to buy this property in cash, not a mortgage, because when it says cash buyers only, it means that you cannot get a mortgage on this property. Okay, it means you need to buy it in cash. You can't get a standard bank loan to buy this property. So we are going to have to take that into consideration when we do our calculations later on. Okay, so it says here Middleton LS10, so that's the area. We can check. Let's go back to the market information. So we might be able to find us the postcode. So it says here Acre Crescent. Let me just check. Is it Acre Crescent? Yes. So I am just going to copy this postcode, and it says LS10 for DJ. If there is the same, if the property is listed on the same street as the ones that are shown in the sold house prices, that means that you have an easier job of simply copying the postcode of the listing that says sold in order for you to compare it with sold house prices. Okay, sometimes, like the first property that we were looking at, the sold house prices did not immediately show property sold in the same street. That's why we had to go through looking at Google and looking at Royal Mail. In this instance, we found another property that sold in the same street, and we simply copied the postcode. So we've got here LS10 for DJ, and we are going to do a semi-detached property, which it was all years and this area only. So I'm gonna say 1 year, but there's not enough information. I might include that to 2 years instead. And maybe a quarter mile. Let's see. Quarter mile, but then last year. Right. That is a 3-bed, like our property. They may not look the same, but a valuer might use this as a basis for a done-up valuation on the property. That's a new build, so I wouldn't use that as a comparable. We don't have pictures here, so it's hard to tell. And also it says new build, so I'm gonna say that's unlikely to be a like for like comparison. Again, that's a new build. That's a semi-detached. That could be, except we don't have a picture. Another semi-detached, but that's a new build. 145. Okay, that's not looking too different. Right, so it would appear that the closest one would be this 125. I'm just gonna look at the pictures of this listing to see how much we can compare it with. Floor plan. So we've got 2 rooms downstairs. And how do I view this as a whole? All right, well, 3 beds and a shower room. So it looks generally, well, the layout looks like they can be compared. This one, I would, although it doesn't look like the most up-to-date kind of decoration scheme, I don't think it's in any way considered a distressed property. So I'm going to say that for all intents and purposes, this is a done-up property, okay? And this was sold just a few months ago of this year and at 125. I'm looking at the refurb cost on this property, not this one, but the one we're looking at, the one for cash buyers only. I would say that it's probably going to need somewhere between 30 to 35,000. I'm going to include 35,000 on here. There's also things to consider, such as the taxes to pay when you buy a property as an investment. So it's not the home that you're going to live in. So it's not you're not a first time buyer, and so you're going to need to pay taxes on this property. Also, I am as I mentioned earlier, it is likely that unless the property investor has 35,000 pounds in cash to pay for refurb, as well as the cash to buy the deposit, or not the deposit, sorry, the property in cash for the entire amount of the purchase price, then there's also going to be costs involved in terms of financing. Okay, so I am going to assume, just looking at these figures, that the done up valuation on this property is somewhere between 125 and 130,000. Just to be conservative, I'm going to use 125,000. The refurb cost is 35,000. We are going to need to calculate financing costs, taxes, as well as the property, the cost of the solicitors, for example. Okay, sold price. I am going to assume just for this exercise that the vendor is happy to accept at 80,000. Okay, so we shall delete the other two properties, Lambton Place and Nafkin Grove, and instead use the property at Acre Crescent to do our due diligence calculations on. Okay, so let's go back to the listing again. Okay. Just for this exercise, because I don't want to derail you from the topic at hand, which is doing due diligence calculations, I am going to put the financing cost at 0. We are going to assume that this property investor has the cash to buy the property for £80,000 and some other form of finance to pay for the refurbishment at 35,000. Okay. And for the taxes, I am not going to put that to 0 because we need to consider that we definitely need to pay taxes on this property. For purchasing costs, I'm going to put that at 2,000. It's probably around £1,000 to 1,500 for costs, just paying for the solicitors and paying for valuations to go through the conveyancing process of this property. Okay, so we've got taxes. Now there's a temporary change of stamp duty and land taxes rules right now because of COVID, and the chancellor has published new rules on how to calculate for the stamp duty and land tax amount when you're buying a second property, so the property that you're not going to live in. So gov uk sdlt, residential property rates. Now I know I might be confusing you a bit by talking about stamp duty. I just want to put in the value here as the part of calculating for the return of investment. Okay. Start now. This is a freehold property. It's a residential property. The date is now really. Okay. Are you purchasing the property as an individual? Let's assume yes. Will the purchase of the property result in owning 2 or more properties? Yes. Replacing your main residence? No. Enter the price. We said we are going to buy this property for 80,000. Okay. It didn't like the comma. Yes, yes, yes. Calculate your SDLT. Right. So it's 2,400. Okay. Again, we're going to assume that there are no financing costs involved. And So we've got some figures here that's ready to be entered onto our due diligence calculator. But before we can do that, we still need to know, okay, so we've got here the red cells, we've got the done up valuation, yes. Do we have the purchase price? Yes. Do we have the refurbishment cost? Yes. Do we have the rent? No. Do we have the mortgage value? Again, no. Okay, so we are going to find this out shortly. We will need three kinds of rental income. We said we wanted to find out a single buy-to-let income. We also wanted to find out an HMO income and a service accommodation income. We are going to assume that this property and the area where it's in can accommodate all three kinds of rental strategies, okay? So first, actually, let's use Zoopla to find the rental income that we might get on this property. So we have the postcode, I'm gonna use it there. Bedrooms was a 3-bed. Let's use advanced search option. Property type is a house. Furniture, sort by keywords include. We must always stick the include let or let agreed because we want to see the actual let prices, not just the asking prices. But we want to untick shared accommodation because we'll use spare room to check the HMO rental prices on this one, okay? So we're gonna press search. All right. So we've got, these are all 3 beds, 825, 750, 750, 950, 900, 995, 925, 575. I wonder why this one is so low. Probably because it's a terrace property and the others are either semi-detached and they're quite brand new. 795, 695, 725, 650. Sorry, now I'm looking at some of these are not even in Leeds. Right, within 3 miles. No, this area only. Only 3-bed max houses. Search. Okay, so there are no results found. I'm going to increase this slightly by a 1/4 mile. Still none. About 1/2 mile. One result, 795. I'm going to increase that to maybe a mile. Okay, so now I have 4 search results, okay? 4 listings, sorry, in the search results. I've got 750, 650, 795, and 975. Now, I would consider this as not a like-for-like comparable. This one's got a garage, it's a new build, it's a new house. This one can be considered as a comparable, such as this and this. So between 650 and about 750. I think just for being conservative, I am going to use 650 as the rental amount, okay, monthly rental amount. And then we are going to check spare room to look for HMO room prices. And I will now, after I've typed in the postcode, I am now going to make sure that I only select Where was that? I need to select shared rooms. Here we go. Property type, rooms in existing shares. Yes, we like that. Do we want studios and one-bed flats? No. Do we want whole properties? Again, no. We just want rooms in existing shares. So now I'm going to click on apply filters. And we have got 22 search results. Double room, large room, double room, again, LS10. So these are all LS10s. 375, 595 per contract month or contract week. Monthly. Okay. I want to choose the lowest figures, again, to be conservative. I would say, and not quite this one, 350, probably 350. Okay, so HMO is 350. 350 per room multiplied by 3 bedrooms. And fortunately, there's only one living room downstairs. Therefore, I can't use that as a fourth bedroom because the tenants will need a communal area to use as a living room. Okay, so the maximum number of bedrooms I can rent this property for as an HMO is going to be 3 beds. Now, for a service accommodation property, while these properties will mostly be listed on Airbnb, I would actually use AirDNA to get market information. Okay, I'll go to Airbnb to look at competition, but I will go to AirDNA to get market information. Okay, so we said that the postcode was LS10. Tell you what, let's just use, I think they don't use it by postcode, they simply use it by the area. Okay, so we've got leads. Now, these are average figures, so they may not be exact, but in terms of just simply using it as a tool for doing market research and due diligence, AirDNA is the best one out there to use. Plus, it's free. There's subscription prices involved for premium features, but the ones that we need to do market research and due diligence should be sufficient. Okay, so we've got here an average daily rate of £89, okay, per night, and we have got an occupancy rate of 60%. 60%. Now it's actually already telling us your average monthly revenue, which is, well, pre-COVID, you've got £1,300, but sort of COVID period, it went down to 516. Now it's basically saying that the average, looking at these two extreme figures, and I'm not so sure how accurate that's going to be, but it says 1,031. What I'm going to do instead is use the occupancy rate and multiply that by the daily rate. So if I'm going to assume that in a month there's 30 days, so 30 days multiplied by 60% occupancy rate is 18 days, okay? 18 multiplied by 89, gosh, 1,600. I am not comfortable using that figure, especially if it's telling me that the average revenue is actually 1,000. a little over 1,000 and not 1,600. Also, we're still in a pandemic, so there's lockdowns and things, okay? But we shall use 1,000 as the average revenue, monthly revenue we are getting from an Airbnb property, a service accommodation property in Leeds, okay? So we've got these figures down here. I think we might need to get the monthly mortgage amount. Now, remember, we're buying this property in cash, so there's no mortgage involved. However, once we refinance the property, we are going to have a monthly mortgage amount coming out of our income on the property. So, did we not get a mortgage calculator here before? Okay, interest only mortgage calculator. So we're looking at the done-up valuation of 125,000. Mortgage amount on this one, on the done-up valuation, is going to be 75% of 125,000. So we're looking at 93,750 is the mortgage amount. Interest only. Interest rate. It's a little bit higher when it's a buy-to-let mortgage rather than that was probably a residential mortgage. So we're going to use 4%. Or add these fees to the mortgage. Calculate per month. It is expected to be around £312. The mortgage would be 312. Okay, so we've got all the information we need to type in and put in the due diligence calculator. So we've got done-up valuation at 125,000. My calculator is actually already calculated that. I didn't need to do the calculation, but never mind. Purchase price, we said that the vendor is going to accept at 80,000. Refurbishment cost, we said, was going to cost £35,000. We are not going to be able to pull all the money out. We will actually leave an amount of 21,250 on the property. We are going to find out how much return of investment we are going to get with this amount of money left in the deal. So in order for a calculator to calculate that figure, to arrive at that figure, we need to type in the rental figure that we are getting. Okay, so now we are looking at first the mortgage, which is at 312. Monthly expenses is going to be 10% of the monthly rent. So we are going to do this 3 times, okay? One for each rental income strategy that we are going to compare. So the first one is a single buy-to-let, and we said that the monthly rent is going to be £650. We're going to type in 650. The calculator, the spreadsheet calculator, is already calculating the monthly expense at 10%, okay? So according to our calculator, we will have a monthly cash flow of £273 on the property. That means the annual rent is going to be at £7,800. If the done-up valuation is at 125, we are looking at a yield of 6%, 6.24% on the property. It's not a bad yield, but it's not the best that you can get. Some landlords will not buy a property with a yield of less than 10%. Okay, some might be happy even with 5%. So, like I said, 6.24 is not the best, but it's also not the worst. So, if we do a single buy to let, we are looking at a yield of 6.24% or an ROI of, and my calculation has come up with an ROI of 15.42%. Okay, we shall compare that with an HMO rental figure. So we've got £350 per room multiplied by 3 bedrooms. We are going to assume that all the bedrooms, although they're different sizes, they will actually rent at the same amount. Okay, I'm simply doing this because I'm showing you what the calculations look like using the due diligence calculators. Okay, so that's 1,050 monthly rent. Okay, the mortgage will remain the same. The monthly expense, now you are going to have to change this and say that instead of a 10% monthly expense calculation, I'm going to assume that it's at 20%. Okay, so now we've got a cash flow of £528 a month. The yield has gone up to 10% because there's more rent coming in per month. The ROI has gone up to almost 30%. Okay, which is to some landlords is what they're looking for. They're looking for a 30% return of investment. Okay, so now with an HMO, we've got a yield of 10% and an ROI of about 30%. We shall now compare it to a service accommodation strategy. It's not too far off from an HMO strategy. So we might be looking at more or less the same figure here. The monthly expense of a service accommodation might be more or less than 20%. That depends on how often you're going to need to clean the rooms for new guests to stay in the property. There's extra expense involved right now because of the pandemic, and more people are wanting properties to be cleaner than usual. Okay, and as well as the other expenses involved in renting out a service accommodation property these days. For you to get a good rating, you're going to need to put extra accessories, gifts, and other conveniences for guests, such as breakfast or food or toiletries, and maybe even toys if there are kids staying as guests in the property. Okay, so we're going to assume as well that this is going to be 20% monthly expense. Now we're looking at a yield of 9.6 and an ROI of 27.56. So it is looking like the yield and ROI on this property will be less as a service accommodation property than as an HMO property. Okay, and also considering, for example, that there's a pandemic right now, it might just be safer to use this property as an HMO. So the yield we said was 9.6% and the ROI was 27.56. So using the due diligence calculator to look at return of investment is a very useful tool that property investors use in order to decide on either which property to buy or perhaps how much to offer on a property to get the yield that they want to achieve, and also looking at what sort of strategy, if they are to buy this property, what sort of strategy is best to use this property for. So I hope this has been helpful to show you in um, in actual figures using real listings what and how to use the due diligence calculators for. Okay, so all of you will have copies of this spreadsheet, which you can use to do your own exercises with. I've shown you how to find listings, how to select the filters in order to show the right properties that your client, your property investor client is looking for, how to find postcodes using house prices or using Royal Mail postcode finder, how to check comparables, again, using the sold house prices, or even going onto a different property portals such as Zoopla and find information there. And then when it comes to finding the rental amount based on the 3 rental income strategies, then we can figure out what the comparables are and how much rent this property is going to let. If it's an HMO property, we use spare room. If it's going to be a single buy-to-let, we either use Rightmove or Zoopla to find the rental income. If the strategy is going to be a service accommodation strategy, then we are going to use AirDNA to find that information. Okay, we can use any number of mortgage calculators online to find out what the monthly mortgage amount is going to be. And as well as using the government's website to calculate stamp duty and land tax on the property that is in question. Okay, so I'm just going to repeat to you that you are not deciding for the property investor. You are the virtual assistant working for the property investor who might have delegated some tasks to you for market research or for due diligence, because this property investor might be looking at crunching numbers for 10, 20, 50 properties at once. And that's why he needs your help to crunch these numbers. So some of these figures might already be provided for by the property investor, and some you might need to either clarify and confirm with the property investor or do some online research yourself. Okay, when you're working for a property investor, you might need time doing these exercises because you might need to follow a particular strategy that your property investor client wants you to follow. What I'm teaching you are the generals and the basics. The actual calculations might be different for individual landlords based on what their strategy is and based on what they feel like using as figures, whether they are conservative in using figures or they're a little bit more risky. And so all of this might affect the figures that you end up with. Okay, so ultimately it's the property investor who will make the decisions. You are simply there to help him crunch some numbers using the due diligence calculator. Thank you very much. So that concludes day 2 on due diligence and working out some calculations that a property investor client might delegate and ask you to help him with. I shall see you for day 3 tomorrow on lead generation strategies and tools. Thank you.